Welcome to the CARD meeting today. We will start shortly after the hour. Thanks for joining us today. We will start the webinar content in a couple of seconds here. Okay. Good morning. Welcome to this Conservation Applied Research and Development discussion today on charging Minnesota's electric vehicles, strategies that work for the electric grid and consumers. Thanks so much for joining us today. We are excited to pilot a new discussion format today compared to our previous CARD webinar events. First, the final report is currently accessible on the department's website. So in order to access the final report to reference for today's event, the report web link has been shared in the chat. Second, there is more time to respond to and ways to engage on your questions related to the CARD project, which is the topic of today's event. There will still be prepared content shared from our presenters, but in addition to time at the end of the presentation, there'll be time allocated in the middle of the presentation to start to respond to your questions. Further, not only will questions be responded to from the chat, but we encourage you to raise your hand so we can call on you to verbally ask your question during the designated times. We are looking forward to testing today's new discussion format. However, please be patient as it is our first time utilizing this new format for our CARD event. We'll try to get to as many questions as time permits while still covering the prepared material, and we'll make sure to answer unanswered questions after the webinar. Also, due to the discussion format, as we recommend that you enable your closed captioning setting to better follow along. If you'd like closed captions on this webinar, click the CC bubble in the lower left of your screen. Okay, so a couple of discussion basics before we start. All attendees should remain muted throughout today's event. As questions occur to you throughout the presentation, please raise your hand and wait to be called upon during the designated time before unmuting to ask. To mute yourself, please click on the mute button on the lower left of your screen. Attendees are encouraged to keep their cameras on throughout today's discussion. You can also type your questions into the chat box and we'll respond to those questions after responding to those questions of folks with raised hands. The chat box can be opened by clicking the chat bubble on the lower right of your screen as indicated by the red arrow on this slide. You can raise your hand by clicking the hand icon indicated by the blue arrow on this slide. This discussion is being recorded and will be made available on the department's website as well. The slide set from today's presentation will be emailed to all registrants within 2 weeks from today's broadcast, and we'll also put it on our website too. So without further ado, I am Lindsay Anderson, the Utility Energy Conservation Research Coordinator at the Department of Commerce. There I identify and analyze gaps within utility energy conservation and optimization programs and coordinate and plan research to fill those gaps, of which the CARD program is a major tool of that work. With me today is Adam Zoet, an Energy Program Director, whom is also at the department within the Energy Conservation and Optimization Business Unit. Adam specializes in the regulation of electric and gas utility energy efficiency programs. Adam's work includes leading the evaluation of energy efficiency program cost effectiveness methodologies, overseeing the development of an online platform that captures energy efficiency program data reported for over 100 electric and gas utilities, formulating regulatory policy guidance, managing research grants, and assessing Minnesota utility energy efficiency programs. He is the project manager on the research that is the subject of the discussion and will help moderate and facilitate responding to questions during today's event. Our presenters today are Kenji Takahashi, a principal associate, and Courtney Lane, senior principal with Synapse Energy Economics Incorporated. Mr. Takahashi has over 20 years of experience in decarbonization planning, programs, and technologies within the energy sector. He has evaluated the design and potential of various decarbonization measures and policies for clients across North America, including energy efficiency, electric vehicles, cold climate heat pumps, and network geothermal systems. Additionally, he has assessed these measures as alternatives to traditional wires or pipeline solutions, assessing their impacts on electric grid and gas load forecasts and system planning. Mr. Takahashi holds an MA in Urban Affairs and Public Policy with a focus on energy and environmental policy from the Biden School of Public Policy and Administration at the University of Delaware, and a BA in Law with a focus on public administration from Kensai University in Osaka. Ms. Lane has more than 20 years of experience in energy policy and utility regulation. She specializes in performance-based regulation, grid modernization, benefit cost analysis, and review of utility distributed energy resource and electric vehicle filings. Ms. Lane has worked extensively both in the public and private sector through her time spent on state-level clean energy advocacy for environmental nonprofit Penn Future and on demand-side management planning and implementation for National Grid. Ms. Lane holds a Master of Arts in Environmental Policy and Planning from Tufts University and a Bachelor of Arts in Environmental Geography from Colgate University. This card discussion is one in an ongoing series designed to summarize the results from research projects funded by Minnesota's Applied Research and Development Fund, which was established in the Next Generation Energy Act of 2007. Research areas were expanded with the passage of the Minnesota 2021 Energy Conservation and Optimization Act, also known as ECO. The purpose of the fund is to help Minnesota utilities achieve their energy savings goal. $2.6 million is set aside annually for the CARD program, which awards research grants in a competitive request for proposal process. Results from CARD projects provide utilities with data to enhance energy efficiency program designs within their energy conservation and optimization portfolios. As you can see by the pie chart, CARD projects funded to date have been in all building sectors, as well as some that cross multiple sectors. The subject of today's webinar is a project that impacts multiple sectors, and our presenters will share results from a recent CARD project on advancing and optimizing electric vehicle adoption in Minnesota through utility energy conservation and optimization programs. This project provides decision makers with valuable insights into program design elements that can be integrated into existing utility eco programs to support utility conservation program implementation. Now I will turn it over to Mr. Takahashi and Ms. Lane for today's presentation.
Great. Thanks so much for joining our webinar today. So electric vehicles will play a crucial role in the state's efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. However, if not managed well, EV charging could strain the electricity grid and increase costs for consumers in the state. On the other hand, if EVs are charged primarily during off-peak hours, when the grid has excess capacity, EV could help lower the cost for all consumers. The extent to which EVs will impact electricity costs will largely depend on whether customers have incentive to shift the charging away from peak demand hours. So our report addresses this issue by focusing on the 4 key research questions outlined on this slide. So the first, what is the expected increase in EV cell stocks in the state through 2030? What are the anticipated impacts on electric grid and consumer costs in 2030 resulting from increased EV stocks? This also includes the impacts of EV managed charging programs. What type of EV-related programs are currently offered by the utilities in the state? And what key program design elements can be incorporated into existing programs to promote greater adoption of EV while mitigating the associated impacts on the electric grid? Next, please. Thank you. Right. So this presentation will provide a high-level overview of our report, going through the topics shown on this slide. For topic 1 to 4, we'll present our EV analysis, starting from the status of EV adoption in the state to our estimates of EV system and consumer cost impacts in 2030. And from topic 5 to 8, my colleague Courtney will present our assessment of EV programs in the state and elsewhere. We'll conclude our presentation with our recommended modification to existing utility programs, the ECO programs, to help enhance the effectiveness of EV programs in the state. Next. Thank you. This slide shows EV sales trend over the past decade, with a breakdown of battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid vehicles. EV sales were low for the first several years, as shown here, before 2018. Since then, EV adoption has been growing rapidly, now reaching nearly 7% of all light-duty vehicle sales. As of 2023, last year, there were about 50,000 light-duty EVs registered in the state, which represents about 1% of light-duty vehicles. EV growth will need to continue to accelerate rapidly to meet the state's target of 20% LDVs by 2030. We use our in-house model called EV Ready to forecast EV deployment and assess the potential impacts on the electric grid and utility costs under a possible range of EV adoption scenarios, as shown here on the slide. The low EV case and the high EV case. The high EV case represents aggressive EV adoption with a target of 20% of light-duty vehicles by 2030, which aligns with the state's LDV EV stock target, and 7.2% medium and heavy-duty vehicles EV by 2030, which aligns with California's Advanced Clean Truck Rule, or ACT. Since the ACT was adopted in California, it's being adopted by many other states. The next scenario, the low EV case, represents a more gradual adoption trajectory. We developed this trajectory using the difference between the EV forecast from Bloomberg New Energy Finance and our own high EV case. This assumes that Bloomberg forecast represents a midpoint between the high EV case and the low EV case. And this results in EV stocks reaching 10% of light-duty vehicles and 5.6% of medium and heavy-duty vehicles in the state by 2030. Next. Our EV Ready analysis estimates that EVs are expected to consume between 2.9 terawatt-hours in the low case and 5.2 terawatt-hours in the high EV case annually by 2030, which represents 4.4% to 7.8% of the state's current residential and commercial electricity sales. We then estimated the summer and the winter peak load impacts from EV based on the annual consumption outputs we got from EV Ready and publicly available EV charging profiles. Can you just 1 second, please? Oh, sorry. Okay. Without managed charging, we estimate that EV could add 450 megawatts to 830 megawatts to the summer peak demand 2030, which is about 3 to 6% of today's summer peak, and 150 megawatts to 220 megawatts to the winter peak demand, which is about 1 to 2% of today's winter peak. Next, please. We then estimate the peak load reductions from managed charging programs based on a review of the performance of such programs, which includes direct control of EV batteries and time of use rates or other varying rates. This analysis focuses on LDVs and excludes any managed charging for larger vehicles, medium and heavy duty vehicles, because the experience of managing charging for those large vehicles is very limited. In that sense, our analysis is conservative. The chart shows the peak load impacts in megawatts for medium heavy duty vehicles in yellow and LDVs in blue. In blue. Yeah, so these cases across all, right, sorry. And this also shows the three charging management profiles. No managed charging from the left side, and low managed charging and high managed charging for the two scenarios. One key takeaway is that managed charging could reduce peak demand by 24% to 66%, depending on the scenario. Next slide. Next slide. Oh, thank you. Investments needed for incremental generation, transmission, and distribution due to EV load increases could reach about $110 million per year by 2030 in the high EV case, and $55 million per year in the low EV case without managed charging. And if we account for the impacts of managed charging, annual utility costs could be reduced to as low as about $30 million in the high case and $50 million in the low case. This represents substantial reduction in utility investments by 30 to 72%. And managed charging and EV electricity sales are expected to increase utility revenues substantially. So this potentially lowers electricity rates in the long term. Projected annual revenue from EV electricity sales could reach $565 million in the high case and $284 million in the low case, surpassing the associated utility costs significantly. These results suggest that substantial EV adoption could lead to considerable increase in electricity peak demands, necessitating large utility investments. However, strategies such as managed charging could mitigate these impacts, reduce the need for extensive infrastructure upgrades. Further, despite potential increase in utility costs, higher revenues from electricity sales from EVs are likely to put downward pressure on utility rates, benefiting all utility customers. The findings show that potential impacts and benefits for future EV deployment. They also highlight the importance of proactive planning and the crucial role of managed charging in maximizing the benefits of EV adoption. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenji. Okay, so I am going to stop sharing my screen so we can all see each other with those that have their cameras on. And so thanks for the presentation so far. We're going to pause the presentation and start to answer questions. So there still is prepared content after this pause for initial questions. We have 4 slides. So we will resume prepared content after this, but at this point, if you haven't raised your hand and want to raise your hand to ask a question, please do so, or you can ask questions in the chat. And again, we do encourage you to turn on your camera and raise your hands to be called upon to verbally ask your question. So with that, Adam, do you see any hands raised or any questions in the chat for Mr. Takahashi or Ms. Lane?
Yeah, just looking through the list here. So far, no raised hands, but we have gotten a couple of questions in the chat. So one of the questions is, what % of new vehicle sales need to be EVs in order to achieve 20% of Minnesota vehicles being EVs by 2030?
Good question. Yeah, just 1 second. I have to look at the reports. Sales, right? 2030. Yeah, so in the low case, LDV sales have to reach about 55%, And in the high case, it's pretty high, like 96% of all the LDBs cells.
Excellent. Another question that came in the chat is in creating your forecasts for the first portion of the report, did you compare it to existing Minnesota utility forecasts and data on EV charging?
Yes, yeah, we did review the assessments, but I don't remember exactly how ours is different.
Okay, yeah, and we have, I think Lindsay posted a link to the final report in the chat, which, yeah, has a lot of the methodology details about the study, if people want to dig into those in the final report too. So another question that came in the chat, why is the winter peak so much lower than summer? It seems like EVs will use significantly more power in the winter, considering most EV owners will pre-warm their vehicles in the early winter mornings.
Right, yeah, good question. So yeah, so EV loads generally higher because efficiency of EVs are lower. So it could consume like 30% more energy. However, the timing of charging, so we look into charging profiles and found out that the most of the chargings occur in late afternoon, and the winter peak is going to be early in the morning, based on our analysis that we did for Minnesota in another project, which is including the impacts of building electrification. So based on that, because the charging profile, we found that we use the charging profile from DOE, US DOE's EV Pro Lite tool, and LBNL for medium heavy duty vehicles. So based on that, the amount of charging in early morning was pretty low compared to late afternoon.
Thank you. Yeah, another question in the chat was just wondering if there's kind of a definition that we used in the study for managed charging.
Yes, so we define managed charging as two big type of programs. One is direct control of EV charging by utilities, and another one is using time of use rates, varying rates, or critical peak pricing. So pricing, that's the other component. And for the high participation scenario, we assume opt-out TOU rates, which tend to have much higher participation rates.
Yeah, great, thank you. So looking through the list here, oh, looks like Mike has his hand up. If you want to unmute yourself, Mike.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Could you comment the off-peak charging incentives or reduction in costs for the charger person that's charging? You know, currently we have an EV and we're in the XL territory, and we're not being incentivized by rates for charging off-peak hours. It doesn't matter whether we charge at 9 in the morning or 1 in the morning.
Yeah, I think, Courtney, this may be a question for you.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little unclear of the question. We did not necessarily look into the types of different time of use rates that were offered, but one recommendation we have for future programs is the creation of EV specific time of use rates for customers that don't want to be on a whole home time of use rate, which could get at your point of wanting to be incentivized to charge off peak through a rate versus some type of managed charging program.
I'm sorry. Could you? I didn't follow that. So, in order to meet those parameters that were described in the first presenter, those were based on off-peak charging. So, how is Commerce working with the PUC and the utilities to incentivize people with EVs to charge during off-peak hours?
So I don't want to answer for Commerce, but I'll just say that we found that all of the utilities currently offer either a time of use rate that customers can enroll in or managed charging program where you receive an incentive for charging a certain percentage of your time off peak. So my understanding is those are available throughout the different service territories, but I'll also defer the second part of that question to Commerce if you want to take that.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I know Anthony Fryer, who was the director of the ECO program, is on the call, so he might have input on this as well. But it's a little different with this study because we're looking at how EVs and EV infrastructure might fit within the energy conservation and optimization program, which is primarily focused on driving energy efficiency in the state through energy efficiency programs, and a little bit less part of our purview is looking at how rates kind of interact with these programs. But I don't, Anthony, do you have additional thoughts about that?
No, only the as Courtney mentioned, the time of use rates for EVs, I think, are available in one form or another through certain utilities. I can't speak for all 180 utilities that we have in Minnesota, and also just a couple of other things. I know demand response and load flexibility is a big priority of the Minnesota PUC, and the Department of Commerce certainly shares that as well. And it's also important to acknowledge that this is the first year that the current ECO framework is being implemented by the investor-owned utilities. And so while there might not be EV charging related measures in all portfolios at the moment, it's likely that they are coming in many cases as the utilities develop a better understanding of what is possible and what's available through this new ECO framework.
Thanks, Anthony. And it looks like Hannah from the PUC has her hand up. Do you want to unmute, Hannah?
Yeah, I just thought I would chime in just to answer that question, that the PUC has worked with vehicle electrification and time of use rates starting back in 2015. And so Xcel does have numerous programs. So I would encourage folks who are interested in the PUC side. We've got a section on our website that's dedicated to the different dockets and programs that we have on EVs. So just we'll add in there to check that out. And we're making sure we work closely with Commerce, with the ECO portion going forward to make sure that things are in alignment with the existing time of use rates.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah.
If you had the link to that PUC website, would you mind popping that in the chat. That'd be interesting to see.
And,
Yeah,
and
I'll get that in there.
sounds, thanks, Adam. Thanks, Hannah. I'm going to bring us back into the prepared content, the remaining prepared content, about 4 slides, and then we will have again time for Q&A, both with raising hands and through the chat. So hold on to your questions until that time, but please do ask them then. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again so we can see the slides to proceed on. Okay.
Great, thank you. And yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Courtney Lane with Synapse. I'll be covering the program-related research that we did for this report. So our research started with planning to review existing EV programs within the ECO program plans. As background, as probably all of you know, the ECO Act replaced the Conservation Improvement Program to provide a more holistic approach to energy efficiency programs. Pertinent to our study, it opened the door for EV programs by permitting efficient fuel switching. So it urges utilities to include EV programs, rates, or tariffs in their eco plans by allowing utilities that include those programs to subtract electricity sales associated with EV charging from their gross annual retail sales. We found that Otter Tail was the only utility to date that's included EV programs in its 2024 to 2026 eco plan. They included things like EV charger rates, residential EV charger rebates, and rebates for electric vehicles. The other utilities reviewed for the study, Xcel Energy and Minnesota Power, provide their EV programs outside of the eco plans through transportation electrification plans. Next slide. So for the purpose of this study, we looked at 3 different EV program case studies. And as Kenji alluded to in his part of the presentation, utility EV programs and utility spending can have direct impact on mitigating the adverse effects of increased peak demand from transportation electrification. However, if the programs are not designed in a manner that maximize benefits and minimize costs, the ability of additional revenues from EV charging to reduce electricity rates for all customers will be reduced. So it was in this lens where we reviewed the current utility EV programs and developed 3 case studies to describe how largest Minnesota utilities are supporting transportation electrification sector. So we chose 3 common types of programs. So first we looked at Otter Tail's load management for EVs program. As I mentioned before, this was the only utility where EV programs were included in an eco plan. This program pairs a $500 rebate for installing level 2 EV charging with a requirement that customers enroll in one of the company's off-peak rates. Our assessment of this program is that it's beneficial that there is a requirement that customers enroll in an off. Without this requirement, the program risks resulting in additional load during peak hours, which can increase utility system costs that are ultimately borne by all ratepayers. However, we have some concerns that this program may have high levels of free ridership. So free ridership refers to situations whereby participants in a program would have adopted the technology even without the existence of the utility program or an incentive. A concern is that customers that can currently afford an EV tend to be higher income and may already be able to afford these level 2 chargers without any incentives. And across jurisdictions offering these types of programs, we haven't yet seen any evaluation or data looking at this free ridership aspect. There are also existing incentives for charging infrastructure available to customers. So automakers are beginning to provide customers with level 2 chargers or level 2 charger incentives with the purchase of an EV. And the Inflation Reduction Act includes a for EV charging currently anyway. The second program we looked at was Xcel's Optimize Your Charge pilot. This is a non-eco program that encourages customers to charge their EVs during off-peak periods. To be eligible, customers must already have a level 2 charger and or an EV with onboard telematics from Xcel's approved list. The program provides a fixed $50 annual bill credit to customers when they charge at least 25% during designated off-peak hours, and customers can choose between 2 different charging schedules. Our assessment of this program is that it's beneficial that it does not directly provide rebates for level 2 charging, and instead is providing a rebate to encourage customers that already have the enabling equipment to participate. It also provides customers with flexibility between choosing across different schedules. However, we have a concern that the program's requirement for the % is too low and doesn't sufficiently encourage off-peak charging. We recommend that managed charging programs should incentivize participants to minimize on-peak charging and shift all or majority of their EV charging to off-peak periods, and particularly to hours when the grid is particularly away from the hours when the grid is most stressed. So the last program we looked at was Minnesota Power's Fast Charger program. The goal of this program is to encourage EV adoption by easing range anxiety and creating equitable access for charging. Minnesota Power has the ability to install and own a network of 16 public fast chargers. At least that's what it was when we began this study. Minnesota Power has prioritized locations in both rural and densely populated areas within its service territory. Our assessment of this program is that it's very similar to those in other jurisdictions that permit a limited number of utility-owned EV stations. And we find that it may be appropriate for utilities to own and operate a limited number of stations to jumpstart the market, especially in areas where the private market has not intervened. However, utility ownership is not really the most cost-effective way to support EV adoptions, and this is a space where the private market can perform the same function as the utility. With utility ownership of charging station, the utility customers are ultimately bearing the risk of stations not being utilized and profitable. In addition, utilities as regulated monopolies have an unfair market advantage over potential competitors that can stifle private market growth that can help to reduce prices over time. For these reasons, we commonly recommend that utilities should focus on services that the private market can't provide. So things like utility side of the meter make-ready work, and focusing on areas like underserved communities and low-income multifamily properties where you might not have the private market come to and install stations. Next slide. So our assessment of the programs that I just reviewed was based on what we believe to be best practices from other jurisdictions. For rebates for level 2 chargers, we find that many jurisdictions are moving away from utility incentives for level 2 chargers as the market transforms in their jurisdiction. For example, the Maryland Public Service Commission recently ended utility programs that had provided a $300 rebate for level 2 chargers, citing the availability of vehicle telematics to enable participation in off-peak charging programs. Similarly, the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities limited utility rebates for EV supply equipment to just low-income customers. For the second type of program we looked at for managed charging, we found that there are similar programs to Xcel's Optimize Your Charge program that require a higher level of off-peak charging for receiving the rebate. For example, in New York requires a customer to charge during the off-peak period at least 80% of the time to receive that $50 incentive. Related to utility ownership of public fast charging, in New York, instead of permitting utilities to own and operate fast chargers, utilities offer incentives only to cover make-ready costs. Massachusetts also has a focus on make-ready. And the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities has guidelines that prohibit utilities from owning or operating chargers unless the location is deemed an area of last resort, which means there is no private market interest for 18 months after a utility program starts or 12 months in overburdened communities. Next slide. So in conclusion, these are our final conclusions and recommendations regarding the 3 types of programs we looked at. For residential EV charger rebates, we recommend that the charger rebates be limited to customers. And to reduce costs and free ridership, we recommend that future load management programs should enroll customers with existing chargers and leverage onboard telematics instead. This will help to ensure that utility incentives are going towards programs where they're actually influencing a customer's decision and what their investments are. However, if rebates continue, we recommend that recipients of those rebates continue to be required to enroll in a managed charging program or time of use rate. Related to the managed charging programs, we recommend an increase to the percentage that a customer has to charge off-peak from at least 25% to at least 80% to ensure that the program is providing sufficient benefits to the distribution system. Related to fast chargers, we recommend that going forward, instead of owning the fast chargers that utilities should support, make-ready charging infrastructure build out incentives to cover the necessary utility side make-ready work or the work up to the customer's meter to support the deployment of private sector EV charging infrastructure. And I did skip over the expansion of managed charging programs to additional sectors such as fleets and multifamily customers. And I think that's our last slide.
Great. Thank you. That includes today's speaker's presentation. So thank you so much to Kenji and Courtney for your great presentation. So again, attendees, I am going to stop showing my screen so we can see everybody. I welcome you to turn on your cameras and raise hands to verbally ask questions or ask questions in the chat box. We'll do a little bit more Q&A and then we'll have a couple of wrap-up slides as well. So yeah, Adam, are you seeing any raised hands or new questions in the chat box?
Sounds good. So far, doesn't look like any raised hands, but we do have a number of questions in the chat. So one of the questions are, were the costs of additional managed chargers themselves considered in these calculations? This can be seen as an increased cost for EV drivers if they need to purchase an additional utility-approved charger.
So I think Kenji, this might be a question for you. Was the cost of programs included in your analysis? Is that right?
Yeah, okay. So our analysis did not include the cost of managed charging programs or any administrative cost that is required for implementing operating time of use rates. However, we did one study that looked at existing EV adoption and estimated the rate impacts, which included the cost of existing EV programs across the country. And based on the study, we still found that the revenues exceeds the cost of the program on the EVs.
Great, thank you. Let's see. No raised hands still, but yeah, another question. Oh, I see that Hannah from the PUC posted some links in the chat that gives an overview of the Minnesota Public Utility Commission's EV programs and pilots. So thank you, Hannah, for posting those for people to check out. Another question in the chat was, did you consider rebates for level 2 chargers when people purchase used EVs that don't involve a level 2 charger being given by a dealership?
Sure, good question. So I think in general, our concern is that even if a customer is purchasing a used car, that the incremental costs between a non-networked level 2 charger or just a level 1 charger, that it's unclear that customers really need these incentives to purchase level 2 chargers. And we really recommend that if these types of incentives continue, that a participant survey that understands whether customers actually need these level 2 rebates in order to incentivize them to purchase the necessary equipment to participate in these even managed charging programs if that's necessary. Our concern is really that there's, a lot that needs to be spent in order to electrify the transportation sector, and there's only so much room on a customer's bill. So where are these incentives needed to get customers to participate?
Sounds good. Thank you. Another question in the chat says, I'm curious whether or how your recommendations around ownership of charging infrastructure are affected by the recent disruption of the competitive EV charging landscape, including multiple major players exiting the North American market.
That is a great question. I have not had a chance to look into it, but I believe there was a recent order that came out in New Jersey that made some possibly some adjustments to that timing I mentioned of the area of last resort. So I think, we made these recommendations probably, 5 months ago now. So I think it is something to consider in your jurisdiction. And I think we like the way New Jersey sort of sets up. Utilities aren't necessarily not allowed to own charging, but the onus is on them to justify why the market hasn't developed and why their ownership of utilities is important. And I think the New Jersey order sort of creates a nice balance there between indicating that preference is for the utility to invest in make-ready work, but if there are circumstances related to companies exiting the market or supply chain issues or the specific demographics where you're not seeing the private market come into play. So for example, low-income multifamily buildings, disadvantaged communities where it's probably too risky for private developers to think they'll make money in those areas, that there's an opportunity to have that discussion during the examination of the EV filings.
Thank you. Another question that came in asks, does supporting the make-ready side for fast charging mean the utilities assume the cost of that work?
So what we've seen is that utilities are providing incentives. So it's similar to a customer receiving a rebate for the utility side make-ready work, but what it really means in actuality is the customer isn't required for that kayak charge, I always forget the term of it, but the customer's share of the infrastructure cost. So we've seen programs where it's 50% of that's covered up to 100% of those utility side make-ready costs. The customer no longer has to pay for that. So it's paid through the electric transportation plan.
And I think in New York, they provide higher incentive for make-ready if it's within any low-income or disadvantaged communities.
Mm-hmm.
Another question in the chat asks, it seems that your evaluation of utility EV charging programs primarily focused on single-family homes. Did you consider programs for multifamily buildings?
So a caveat, I adopted this project from a colleague that left, and I don't actually know what went into the decision for how they focused on the programs they did. So I guess short answer is no, those programs weren't addressed as one of the case studies, but I'm not sure of the reasoning for that.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm trying to recall way back at the beginning of the project how those were prioritized. Yeah, I think we just wanted a broad look at best practices related to EV program, and maybe that just didn't, I guess, fit within the scope of the project. But yeah, definitely a important thing to look at going forward. Another question in the chat asks, what fraction of EV owners have level 2 chargers? Are level 2 chargers necessary in order to implement managed charging? And if so, do the benefits exceed the cost of the chargers?
So I don't have a good understanding of the number of customers that have level 2 chargers. If you don't have, so EV telematics can be used for managed charging programs without the need for the networked level 2 charger. There are still a limited number of vehicles, vehicle makes or OEMs that have onboard telematics, but I think there's about 5 different manufacturers that enable EV telematics for the managed charging program. If you don't have EV telematics, you would need a networked level 2 charger, so a charger that has two-way communication, so the utility or a third party can take control of your charging through that charger. And I can't recall what the third part of that question is. Could you restate that, Adam?
Yes. Yeah, sorry, I will scan back to it. Yeah, so is what fraction of EV owners have a level 2 chargers, and then are level 2 chargers necessary in order to implement managed charging? And if so, do the benefits exceed the cost of the chargers?
Oh, okay, yes. So the benefit cost analysis results of these programs are a little tricky because we've seen some utilities conduct a benefit cost analysis of the managed charging program, not incentives are included with that. So it's really hard to give a clear indication. We've seen in general that managed charging programs typically have not been cost effective yet, but part of that issue is that they have been relatively small scale at this point, and there's a lot of upfront fixed costs associated with getting those programs off the ground, and costs that don't necessarily change based on the number of enrollees. So to the extent that participation in these types of programs can expand over time, we think that they'll become more cost effective.
Sounds good. Yeah, just scanning through the chat, looks like there's some back and forth about EV programs, and not seeing any other questions directly related to the study. At this point in the chat, I'll just look if there are any other raised hands. Not seeing any there either. So yeah, I can kick it back to you, Lindsay, if that sounds good to go through the wrap up.
Yep, that sounds great. Thanks again, everybody, for all of your questions today. I am going to move us through a couple of concluding slides before we wrap up. So Okay. So, so yeah, as shared at the beginning of today's event, the final report for this project is currently accessible on the department's website, and it was put in the chat. Though if you would need to go find it later, it's accessible through the Research Since 2020 button on the department's Applied Research and Development webpage, is circled on this slide. The recording of this discussion will be available in the same location on the department's website in a couple of months. When available, you can link to any of these resources from our webpage. Although the CARD website rebuild is now complete, we are still in process of adding slide decks, fact sheets, and other resources to all projects that are in that Research Since 2020 area. However, the slide set will be emailed to all webinar registrants within a week or two of today's broadcast discussion. In addition to this project's final report and discussion recording, the department's R&D webpage has additional resources and information related to the CARD program and to other CARD research projects. Research results and resources before 2020 can also be accessed through the R&D webpage through the web links on the left side of the page. And then other projects beyond this project are also listed in that Research Since 2020. So take a look at what has been funded and completed since 2020. And then please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions or concerns related to accessing CARD research posted here. So thanks again for everybody participating in today's discussion. We really appreciate your interest in CARD projects. To keep abreast and register for upcoming CARD webinars as they are scheduled, or other news related to the Minnesota Energy Conservation and Optimization Program, you can sign up for ECO updates through the department's email list, of which a web link is on the slide, which will be shared within the slide deck. The web link is also available on the R&D webpage on the left side of the page. We hope to see you at our next CARD event. As a reminder, upcoming CARD events you can now register for include Slipstream's Cold Climate Variable Refrigerant Flow Demonstration and Market Research Project, which that webinar will be held on December 11th. And yeah, of course, your feedback matters. So again, if you have feedback, you can also, or don't hesitate to contact me either regarding feedback on the CARD program or CARD events. So that ends today's discussion. With that, take care and goodbye.